Shot fired! Shot fired over here! I'm not where the second shooting from.
4:30 horrifying seconds as the masked gunman approached, firing his modified assault-style weapon early yesterday. Newly released video shows panicked patrons screaming and taking cover in a nearby bar.
I am completely torn in my soul on this one, and my mind as I think about it. Because on the one hand, he's a mass murderer. Like, he's a mass murderer. He went around and intentionally with a 100-round clip in like 30 seconds killed all these people in our home state of Ohio here, just a couple hours from here.
Yeah.
And that's despicable. It's horrible.
It is.
And the other side of me says he's someone's son.
Right.
That they remember as loving camping and having striking blue eyes. And they're ashamed of what he did.
Right.
And they're devastated by what he did. And they didn't send a release to a newspaper. They was just like, what you do. You set up an obituary at the funeral home, and then people are going to come to the funeral. They're not, What do we do with this? I feel, this is going to sound terrible, and someone's going to get mad at me for this. I feel terribly that they had to apologize for an obituary.
I'm angry about it. It makes me angry that someone would be so despicably rude that they would go after a family that's mourning the loss of their child. I understand maybe you're hurting because you lost your child because of this kid, but this is such a minor, little, teeny, tiny bit of press that probably hardly even in the press anymore. It would be online somewhere. You have to look it up to find it. And you're going to go after them for something like that as they mourn the loss of their child. I would say to you, if you're one of these complaining people who went after them, what despicable act of your life do you want aired in your funeral?
You know what we about to do? We about to get real. We about to have conversations that Christians have behind closed doors, the scary, raw ones, the ones that make you feel uncomfortable. That's where we going. Why? Because we're family. Ustedes son mi familia.
So this is the Brian and Janelle podcast. She's Janelle and I'm Brian. And if you don't want to miss anything, all you got to do is just hit subscribe and get that notification whenever we drop a new episode. This is the Brian and Janelle podcast. This is the first time in my life I've ever heard of someone having to apologize for an obituary. Have you ever heard of this before?
Never.
And at first I'm like, you have to read the whole headline to have it make some sense, but It's an obituary, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And so the obituary that has since been removed and apologized for described a young man who died at the age of 24 as, quote, a funny, articulate, and intelligent man with striking blue eyes and a kind smile. It also described him as an avid reader, choral singer, who enjoyed playing Xbox and camping with Boy Scouts. That sounds pretty typical of an obituary, doesn't it?
Yeah. Someone who passes away in their late teens or early 20s.
Yeah.
Well, here's the catch. The family of the Dayton mass shooter are the ones who posted this. They posted an obituary for their daughter, who their son murdered, and for him. And that, I was quoting from his obituary that has since been removed. It's been taken down from the funeral home's website at the request of the family. And now the family spokesperson has issued an apology on the website instead. And here's what it says. Quote, Stephen and Moira Betts apologized that the wording of the obituary for their son Connor was insensitive and not acknowledging the terrible tragedy that he created. In their grief, they presented the son that they knew, which in no way reduces the horror of his last act. We are deeply sorry.
Oh.
And they, when they posted it, it was essentially them mourning the loss of the son they remember.
Yeah.
Right.
And of course, his worst moment in his life was his last moment.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, and this is where I need help on this, because I am completely torn in my soul on this one, and my mind as I think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Because on the one hand, he's a mass murderer. Like, he's a mass murderer. He went around and intentionally with a 100-round clip in like 30 seconds killed all these people in our home state of Ohio here, just a couple hours from here.
Yeah.
And that's despicable. It's horrible.
It is.
And the other side of me says he's someone's son.
Right.
That they remember as loving camping and having striking blue eyes. And they're ashamed of what he did.
Right.
And they're devastated by what he did. And they didn't send a release to a newspaper. They was just like, what you do. You set up an obituary at the funeral home, and then people are going to come to the funeral. They're not,
And they're grieving
And they
their
gotta
son
apologize.
and their daughter. Yeah.
They have to apologize
Yeah.
for mourning their son.
Yeah.
What do we do with this? I feel, this is going to sound terrible, and someone's going to get mad at me for this. I feel terribly that they had to apologize for an obituary.
I'm angry about it.
Are you?
It makes me angry that someone would be so despicably rude that they would go after a family that's mourning the loss of their child. I understand maybe you're hurting because you lost your child because of this kid, but this is such a minor, little, teeny, tiny bit of press that is probably hardly even in the press anymore. It would be online somewhere. You have to look it up to find it. And you're going to go after them for something like that as they mourn the loss of their child. I would say to you, if you're one of these complaining people who went after them, what despicable act of your life do you want aired in your funeral? Do you want your obituary to say, the kind, loving father who cheated on his wife multiple times, or the happy-go-lucky mother with the bright blue eyes who often cursed at people in line, and we all have things that we would prefer not be shared at our funeral. We don't want people to say what a terrible person we were. And why would you, at this time, go after this family for something like that? It makes me mad.
Well, see, Ron, you're mad, and I'm conflicted, and yet I have more of I feel bad for the family in this moment. But we're like, and I know, Janelle, we've talked about this off the air, that you have very similar feelings to both of us.
Yeah.
But at least so far, we're like the only ones saying this. Everybody else is like, yeah, what are you doing posting an obituary for your mass murderer?
Right.
Now,
And
in fairness, if Hitler's mom posted an obituary for him, we'd all be like, please.
Right.
But this is,
Hitler was 20 years of egregious crimes.
And millions of deaths.
Yeah. This kid was one iota of his life.
And not that we're justifying, obviously, what he did.
Of course we did. It's terrible.
Exactly. But it's, like he said, it's a private obituary. She's grieving him and his sister. Like, they're grieving children. But we're also talking about parents who reported suspicious activities before this happened. So they're really, did their best based on what they could and what they knew. And then this also reminds me of the parents of the Columbine shooters, one of them. And she actually has a TED Talk. And when she shares her perspective, it's so much easier.
What does she say?
She talks about that morning when he left. All he did was whatever. He got ready. She heard him running down the hallway, and just right by the doorway, he was like, bye, see you later. And that's all she knew that morning. Heard about it the same way we did on the news.
TV.
Right. And then she said months later, first of all, she was heartbroken for years about the victims and feeling guilty. But she said, looking back at his diary as a mom, her feeling is man, if I would have known, and I had no idea, because he was conflicted, depressed,
But we all
disturbed.
yell at her like she should have known.
Right. And so I'm very passionate about stories, sitting with people and hearing their story. And in this case, because she has a TED Talk, listening to her perspective and her struggle as a mom and hearing her out loud say, like, man, I read the diary when it was too late. I wish I would have gone back. It's hard to point fingers at her. Mm-hmm. It's hard not to sympathize and be like, wow, you're a grieving mom. Like, I get it. So maybe it's that. It's easy to point fingers at these parents because we don't know them. So it's easy to judge and do what
But maybe
what Ron
we're
says.
being, maybe we're wrong in that. Or maybe we're missing something here.
Maybe.
Are we crazy, family? That we have ranging conflicted feelings from empathy and sympathy to anger, that the family of the mass shooter would have to not only withdraw their son's obituary, but apologize for it? What are we missing here?
Someone texted in and saying, maybe this is what you're missing. Perhaps if they had acknowledged his act in the obituary, people would have been more gracious.
And, in fairness, there would have been a way to do it. I mean, maybe they're not good writers, though. That's the problem. Like, I could have said, you would have said, in spite of his horrific decision in his last day, this is what we remember.
Yeah.
But at the same time, goodness sakes, would we let these people grieve their son?
Yeah.
It's like I don't know. People always talk about how do you humanize, when someone's doing the sin of pornography, you have to say to yourself, that's somebody's daughter.
Right.
Instead of going, what a despicable person would do that.
Someone texted and said, I feel awful for the family. I think they should be allowed to mourn as any other family. And another text says, this response has just brought more attention to this obituary. Had they let it go or just left it alone, how many of us would even know what the obituary said? Monica in Cleveland, good morning. You're on the air.
Good morning. I just want to speak to the believer this morning because the world is expected to be angry. The world is expected to attack.
Yeah.
But us as believers, what we are doing wrong is not wrapping our arms around this wrong.
Yeah.
You know what? I think we lost her call.
Oh, no.
But I appreciate what she's saying, that talking directly to believers, because I was reminded of two passages from Paul in this. Because, we turn people into heroes and we don't define them by their worst moments. Mm-hmm. But let's not forget Paul was the one holding the coats while Stephen got stoned. And then he describes himself, Galatians 1. He says, you know what I was like when I followed the Jewish religion, how I violently persecuted God's church. I did my best to destroy it. I was far ahead of my fellow Jews in their zeal. And then he says in 1 Corinthians 15:9, for I am the least of all the apostles. In fact, I'm not even worthy to be called an apostle after the way I persecuted God's church. Like if we were to truly say that we ought to hold people accountable for their worst, Paul would not be counted as an apostle, as he said.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that he's somehow Paul and the mass shooter in Dayton are the same, but I'm just saying, like, I am not comfortable with anyone who claims Christ going after a family for mourning their son in spite of what he did.
Yeah. Denver texted and said, I just hope the people who lashed out weren't Christians. Shame on them. Cynthia in Cleveland, what are your thoughts?
Hello.
Hey.
Hi. I totally empathize with what is being said. All I can think is what we had just used a minute ago, the analogy with if he who without sin, for some reason, can we cast and judge him? I mean, what more it says to me is the outpouring cry of how we got a problem as a society. Just, to me, it was more of I see it as some kind of outcry that this child had a problem that wasn't addressed. Yeah. Some type of way, some type of how. But we beat him. We stoned him. We look at what we did, and he gave us grace and he gave us mercy. Yeah. We didn't deserve it.
Right.
And we intentionally hung him on the cross.
Yeah.
And he did that for all of us. And I'm not saying that our Lord knows this young man is the act he done. You know, it is all wrong.
And I so appreciate your emotion on this because it connects with even, Jesus hanging on the cross, looking down at those who are yelling at him and making fun of him and taking his stuff.
Yeah.
And he says, Lord, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing.
He says forgive him because he was a young kid. He wasn't older. We just let us know how troubled our society is. He wasn't the only one that has shot people, and not to say that justifies it, but that lets us know how in trouble we are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our society and the outpour and the outcry. And just think in the last 10 years, how many mass shootings we have had. Something that was almost unheard of 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Where are we going?
Nancy sent an email to Ryan and Janelle at moody.edu, and she highlights something that, just makes me want to just hug these parents. She says, perhaps we should pray for the people who were offended by the obituary. Their pain and grief seems to be allowing evil a foothold over compassion. The parents who placed the obituary seem to have acted in line with God's way. I consider it a completely selfish act to not only remove the obituary, but also to apologize. Isn't that crazy? Even their response was full of grace in the middle of their grieving.
Yeah. But see, what's odd too, though, is just 15 years ago, they could have posted this and nobody would have seen it.
Right.
It's not like they took out a billboard or said, leave our son alone. It's on a funeral home website for crying out loud. Somebody had to go find it. They didn't publish it in the paper as far as I know.
Right.
It's on a website of a funeral home. And again, around 15 years ago, who would have heard of this?
Probably not many.
It would have gone unnoticed.
And they didn't play him up as anything spectacular. It was just the kind, simple, he loved camping with Boy Scouts, and he loved, just simple things about his life like you would do for an obituary. Mm-hmm. It wasn't any grandiose inflating of him, just simple comments.
Hollis says both feelings are correct. Why did they not think that this would get a reaction? Because they're grieving? Because they're grieving. Why are people upset? Because they are grieving too. Mm-hmm. If he had killed my child, my friend, or my husband, I would be hard-pressed to show grace. This is really a good time for us to show up. We can hold up all these people in prayer. His family are victims of his violence too. But that's a good point, though, Brian, in terms of your conflicting emotions. If we were victims of his acts, it would be a little difficult to see the obituary.
And yet, it's a level of playing field at the foot of the cross. And this is the difficulty where whenever I hear people talk about the Sermon on the Mount as like a cute little message, I just want to go, have you read it? I mean, when Jesus confronts people who have been like, look how great I am. I don't kill people. Yeah. That commandment, I'm good.
Yeah.
And Jesus says, if you've hated someone in your heart, you've murdered them.
Right.
Now that's it, but that's a dramatic thing to let sink in.
Yeah.
That means we are no different than that shooter, right?
Right.
Sabrina in Cuyahoga Falls, good morning. What do you think about the obituary?
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call. I just have a question for the family. Who are we to decide who gets to grieve and who does not?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Isn't that the question? Yeah.
I'm a grief recovery specialist, and we say all grief is experienced at 100%.
Oh, wow.
That is the parents, that's the victims, that's the community, all of us.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
So instead of determining who's allowed to grieve and who's not, let's be there for one another.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that sounds solidly biblical, my friend. Thank you, Sabrina, for that.
Hey, hold up. Where are you going? You know you like your time with us. You want more. So look down, hit that button right there, subscribe, and you'll get updated episodes, and then you can hang some more.
And guess what? You can help us. How? A 5-star rating. Not 4, 3, 2, 1. No, 5.
You can also hang with us live weekdays 6 to 9 a.m. Interact with us, talk with us. Download the Moody Radio app.
Or at brianandjanelle.org.
And we don't put all this together all by ourselves. There's some great people behind all this production. We want to thank Ron Eastwood, Kelly Ryder, Paul Carter, Doug Hayner, and our awesome and fearless leader, Josue Villa.
And finally, this podcast is a production of Moody Radio in Cleveland, the ministry of Moody Bible Institute.
Well, Brian, that's a wrap.
Yep.